A Chinese invasion of Taiwan is a real and dangerous possibility that could wreck armies and ruin the global economy, worse than ever in the history of humanity. Recent tensions in the Taiwan Strait have stoked fears of a conflict between China and Taiwan, and raised questions about the implications of such a scenario for the global economy. As tensions between China and the United States grow, from a regional perspective, most Southeast Asian countries will anxiously seek to remain neutral. However, this may be difficult. Yet the Philippines faces more challenging choices than most. The outcome of its choices will also matter more to the United States and China. At the most basic level, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan would have serious and specific implications for the Philippines by dint of geography. The Philippines' northernmost islands are 190 kilometers from Taiwan, just slightly further than Japan's nearest island. Despite its strategic goal to remain neutral, the Philippines faces complex realities that make it difficult to continue being a mere observer. For one, its proximity to Taiwan renders the Philippines vulnerable to military attacks from China and Taiwan that may reach its shores. Moreover, the U.S. Philippines security alliance would compel the Philippines to allow the United States access to its airspace and military bases in the event of a cross-strait conflict, making the country a potential launching site for U.S. military action. The Philippines occupies strategic real estate, vital to U.S. national interests and that of many nations. It's also vital to China, which is aiming to be the center of the universe. It's vital to the economic interests of countries that rely on safe passage through sea lines of communication. Furthermore, it's vital for countries in the Indo-Pacific region to dissuade China from pursuing its hegemonic plans. The Philippines archipelago is also a major part of the first island chain, which refers to the first chain of major Pacific archipelagos out from the East Asian continental mainland coast. Currently, the first island chain is the most effective point to counter any Chinese invasion and expanding influence. The Mutual Defense Treaty will give access to the United States to increase its military presence in the region, gaining additional control over 4 more sites and strengthening the Southeast Asian nation's role as a key strategic partner for Washington in the event of a conflict with China over Taiwan. The deal comes as Washington has tried to reaffirm its influence in the region amid a broader effort to counter Chinese aggression, reinforcing partnerships with strategic allies and bolstering relations that have soured in recent years. Fears have also grown over a possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the island democracy that China claims as its territory. Among the 5 treaty allies that the United States has in Asia, the Philippines and Japan are the most geographically close to Taiwan, with the Philippines' northernmost inhabited island of Itbayat just 93 miles away. Having increased U.S. access in northern Luzon, the closest Philippine island to Taiwan, really ensured that the Philippines and the U.S. alliance are going to have a front and center role in Northeast Asian security and deterrence. The Philippines is also strategically important because of what lies beneath the surface of the ocean. The waters just off the west coast of the South China Sea, where China has turned a series of sand mounds into military bases, are flush with undergrowth, making it ideal for stealth submarine movement. The U.S. Marine Corps has proposed shifting towards smaller units in the region that could deploy to remote islands for missile attacks, rear support, counterattacks, or intelligence gathering in the case of a war with China over Taiwan. Along with islands in Japan, the islands of the Philippines represent what American military planners see as one of the most important locations for such tactics. Because of these possible risks, the Philippines regards the preservation of the status quo as paramount to its national security. It is not in the county's interest for Taiwan to become independent from China, as it could be dragged into a military conflict. Neither is it in the Philippines' interest for Taiwan to reunify with China. Taiwan serves as a strategic buffer against Chinese ambitions to dominate the first island chain that overlaps with Philippine maritime claims in the South China Sea. Faced with the evolving geopolitical realities and increasing political tensions, the Philippines will need to strategically prepare itself as it lives with a looming cross-strait crisis that could escalate into a direct Sino-US conflict in the region. This could expose the Philippines to the consequences of a humanitarian disaster, including refugee outflows. Such a scenario has a precedent that is well remembered in the Philippines. At the end of the Vietnam War, tens of thousands of refugees from South Vietnam, as well as ships from the South Vietnamese Navy, evacuated to Subic Bay in the Philippines. The Philippine strategic community also appreciates that China gaining control of Taiwan would be a disaster for Manila's South China Sea interests, which remains the region's most serious external security challenge. As analysts have noted, the United States has limited munitions, raising the possibility that it would be required to cede the South China Sea in the early stages of a conflict with China. And a successful invasion would increase China's power projection capabilities and weaken the ability of the United States to support its ally through an air and naval presence in the region. While the United States could have little hope that other Southeast Asian countries, except perhaps for Singapore, would give practical assistance in the event of a conflict, the Philippines will be in the spotlight. A dearth of other viable regional options makes Luzon, the Philippines' largest island, separated from Taiwan by the Luzon Strait, highly desirable real estate. Notably, some recent war games by U.S. think tanks focused on how a conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan might unfold and assumed that U.S. forces would have military access to bases in the Philippines. This access would make it easier for the United States to support the Philippines through capacity building, including on maritime security, and help the U.S. respond quickly in the event of a humanitarian crisis. The United States also hopes that expanding its security presence within the first island chain would assist in deterring China from further seeking to erode the status quo in Taiwan or in the South China Sea. Extensive access to key locations facing the West Philippine Sea, Luzon Strait, and possibly the Pacific Ocean underscores America's goal to develop integrated deterrence. Taiwan, separated by a narrow strait from mainland China, faces a constant threat from a powerful neighbor that claims the island as an inseparable part of its territory. Beijing continues to view the island's democratic government as a challenge to its authoritarian rule and might take steps to annex Taiwan, to assert its effort that adheres to the One China policy. The U.S., which has armed Taiwan with everything from air defense systems to anti-ship missiles to fighter jets, is not required to intervene if China invades Taiwan. But as President Joe Biden has broken away from strategic ambiguity and said that the U.S. would come to the island's defense if China invaded. It means that if a fight breaks out over Taiwan, it is a battle between the world's two most powerful militaries. Though China's actions have stirred fears of a possible Chinese attack, the U.S. military assesses that an invasion of Taiwan would prove extremely difficult for the Chinese military. It would likely invite intervention from other U.S. military allies from Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, and Australia, which strains the Chinese People's Liberation Army, and creates political and military risks for Chinese leader Xi Jinping and the ruling Chinese Communist Party. The Center for Strategic and International Studies recently ran war games looking at how a large-scale Chinese invasion of Taiwan might play out, and the outcomes were bleak for China, but also for everyone else involved. Taiwan would probably remain unconquered but heavily damaged. The U.S. and its allied forces, assuming they came to the island's aid, would likely be able to take out China's amphibious fleet, but at tremendous cost. The island would struggle to maintain basic services and electricity, and its military would be significantly depleted. China, on the other hand, would be left with tens of thousands of soldiers killed, wounded, or captured, a navy in total ruins, and a shattered amphibious force. Looking at this situation from an economic perspective, a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could mean trillions of dollars in losses and a serious global recession. Over the course of 2022, the war in Ukraine shone a spotlight on geopolitical risks. Several economists examined the potential global economic disruptions resulting from a hypothetical conflict between China and Taiwan. Possibly, the trade and economic effects of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could easily exceed those of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China's economy is 10 times larger than Russia's, and Taiwan's is 4 times larger than Ukraine's. Global businesses and consumers rely much more heavily on China and Taiwan for key intermediate inputs and final goods. Given Taiwan's outsized role in the global advanced semiconductor chip industry, it accounts for 92% of the world's most advanced chips that power our smart devices are made in Taiwan. Any disruption would leave most advanced U.S. and other global tech companies such as Apple, Amazon, and Google, and the global economy at large, in the lurch. Associated disruptions to global supply chains, especially in major chip-consuming sectors such as electronics, automotive, and computing, would have grave repercussions for the world economy. Global trade with China would also decline due to a contraction in global trade financing, shocking the global economy and potentially triggering debt crises among China's more fragile trade partners. A conflict over Taiwan would affect not only economic activity with Taiwan, but with China as well. Even assuming no sanctions or military escalation between the U.S. and China, trade between China and the rest of the world would be severely affected by disruptions to global trade finance. Every year, banks provide $6.5 to $8 trillion in finance to help importers and exporters facilitate trade while goods are in transit. This short-term finance underpins as much as one-third of trade flows. In the event of a conflict between China and Taiwan, risk-averse global investors will pull back from lending activities, reducing the availability of trade finance and thus impairing international trade. While some experts say it could wreak havoc on the global economy, the war between China and Taiwan will also take a devastating toll on the militaries involved. A fellow socialist state ruled by an authoritarian communist party, Hanoi is under growing pressure from China, particularly around overlapping sovereignty claims in the South China Sea. Geographic proximity to the Taiwan Strait means that Vietnam would be well within the range of impact from potential escalations or miscalculations and accidents, and thus it has every reason to be concerned. Taiwan. This is not a conflict that anyone in Southeast Asia would like to see, nor discuss it to the same degree that it animates the Western security debates. But the concerns about potential risks from miscalculations and accidents when there is a heightened military presence are real, and Vietnam, for one, cannot afford to dismiss the possibility of conflict. Vietnam possesses no security alliance with any great power or alliance network, which is exactly what made Ukraine susceptible. Hanoi's non-aligned foreign policy since the end of the Cold War means China might attack without fear of reprisal from stronger nations. The collapse of the Soviet Union left Vietnam feeling spurned by alliances to the extent that Hanoi does not even have a security alliance with its long-standing friend Russia. This puts Vietnam truly on its own in the South China Sea. The Philippines, by comparison, has large, overlapping sovereignty claims with China but can fall back on its alliance with Washington. The widespread condemnation of Beijing's belligerent response to Pelosi's trip from the US, Japan, Australia, and G7 nations, along with calls for all sides to exercise restraint from South Korea and the European Union, could theoretically encourage member states of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations to foster closer ties with Taiwan. ASEAN's official stance reflected the bloc's desire to maintain a balancing posture amid the simmering tensions between Washington and Beijing, while seeking to uphold its status and centrality by offering to play a facilitating role. ASEAN states that are more vulnerable to Beijing's power, and have maritime disputes with the giant neighbor should be learning lessons from Taiwan's situation. Basically, with the ongoing changing dynamic in relations between Beijing, Taipei, and Washington, China with its ascending power, could set a precedent to curb foreign support for smaller and weaker states with its anti-access area denial strategy. Changing economic relativities, and China's growing influence through trade and investment will be factored into the region's strategic calculus.